Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: prophecy, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is the beginning of your Labor Day weekend, and I know you were in the office, and you said, you know, I got a meeting to go to, so you're actually heading home. So perhaps your Labor Day is already starting. Perhaps you're one of those diligent people still in the office, or maybe you've already started on your vacation. So wherever you might find yourself, we are excited that you are taking the time to listen today. And we have a full roundtable. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews, just an opportunity in our weekend edition to talk about a number of issues. And for those of you, especially in the Texas area, most of you are listening in the Dallas area, though not exclusively. I do want to mention this Labor Day rally in just a minute, so get something to write with, because this is an opportunity for you to meet some of these individuals face to face. But Penna, I know we have a lot to talk about today.
We do, and one of the articles we posted, since it's Labor Day, I think it's appropriate, is that household income has jumped to all-time highs under Trump. So it's a good piece of news for Labor Day. And it's also a piece of news that we're not hearing widely reported in the media.
Yeah, I was going to say, what? I haven't seen that anywhere except in the article I posted here. Kelly Shackelford, what is that all about?
That's a big deal, and that's an example of the media bias and what they cover and what they do. I mean, because there's a lot of figures that can be kind of monkeyed around with, like, about the economy, but this is really important. I mean, under Obama, all of his years, I think it went up 0.3, the household income, and now we've got really a 4% jump, with just a new president. Now that, because if people are making more money, if people are getting more of this and more of that, but their household income is not going up, then that tells you all you need to know, that they don't have more money to spend. And so when you start to see that happening, that's what really affects everybody. And that's the kind of thing you would think they would really be talking about.
Yeah. Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you for just a minute, because you and I have talked about before that sometimes presidents take too much credit for a good economy, too much blame for a bad economy. But the argument that I'm hearing from some people that this bump in the economy is due to what Barack Obama did 8 years, and then now Donald Trump is inheriting that doesn't make sense to me.
In Barack Obama's 8 years, he kept blaming the economy during his on George Bush. Now that it's starting to pick up, he wants to claim credit for it. But it is interesting because consumer confidence is way up, consumer spending is way up, manufacturing's way up, small business confidence is way up. There's just a lot of there's a lot of good economic news out there, and we're not hearing a lot of it. There are some headwinds with the tariffs that are going on, and we don't know exactly where that's all going to play out just yet. But the economy is doing very well, and that's good for Republicans because they would like the election coming up in November to be about the economy. If it's about the economy, they feel like they will actually do very well in the election. So they're hoping to get that stressed, but you just don't hear much of it from the media. They'll touch on it and then they move on.
That's the thing. I know that the campaigns really, they don't consider them to start until after Labor Day.
Which is Monday.
Which is here we come. So we're not going to know until starting next week. But I really hope that people do a good job with their messaging. Because, the Republicans should obviously be out there saying what's happening with the economy. Do you want the tax cuts pulled? And I think the Democrats, for once, are going to have to say what they're for. Because their only message right now is we hate Trump. And, he's bad. Let's get rid of Trump. And so I would love to see actually people begin to talk about what they really want done, what they want changed, what they don't want changed. And I don't know if that's, I'm a little cynical. I think that with the media, we're probably still not going to get any of these messaging through, but the campaigns do have a lot of control over what they're arguing, why they're saying elect me and don't elect the other person.
Well, one thing, though, the Republicans are the worst messengers in the world.
There we go.
Even of good news, right?
I'm glad the Lord didn't put them in charge of announcing the coming of Jesus, because nobody would have known about it. The angels would have gotten it mixed up. They're just not good at that. And to your point, it's interesting because I'd like to get the panel's thinking on this. Historically, you were right. The public didn't start focusing on the election until after Labor Day. That was that's when things are people begin to pay attention. I wonder if that's as true these days with the news cycles and so forth. It's just, it may be, it may not be. I just don't know anymore.
I don't think it's true because just of the constant opposition to President Trump that the media reports on. So it's been front and center for so long, all year for sure. So I don't know that, people's knowledge and attention span is going to change that much after Monday. I think it's just going to gradually ramp up. There's
so much that's confusing to me about this election. I mean, a lot of things that we used to know or look at, and there's all these competing forces. We do know that normally the party out of power has the energy, their turnout is larger. I think that's exacerbated even more by the fact that the party out of power hates Trump, and that brings more energy, more people to vote. But there are so many other things. For instance, the economy, the tax cuts, pushing the other way. Household income now, going up dramatically compared to in the past. And you're wondering what, the other thing is, for instance, it used to be that the Republicans did well if the election was nationalized.
Right.
The Democrats did well if it was a local race, because, and that thinking was Democrats would say, I'm going to get you this, I'm going to get you this locally, whereas nationally, the Republicans would benefit. Well, this is kind of national. So, but it's an anti-Trump national. So I'm like, well, how does that play? Does that help the Republicans? So there's all these things that normally these countervailing forces, and I don't think anybody can be sure, what's going to happen and which sort of rules over the other.
I think this particular piece of news is going to be helpful to Republicans because we've had unemployment going down for a while, and we had the tax cut and all of that. And so the economy is getting better, but that was the big complaint, that families are still struggling. They're not making enough money if they are working. So now you've got, okay, I have a job when I didn't, or my salary's gone up. So these are big things that affect your life. And that's what you hear. I don't really love Trump. I don't like his personality, but he's made the economy better. And so people that are in kind of that middle ground that you see at the doctor's office or whatever, they're just starting to vote or think in their own self-interest. And if, you've got more income coming in every month, that's pretty important.
When we come back from the break, let me come to Dr. Merrill Matthews, because one of the articles we posted, and we're going to talk about this all the way through the 3 hours, are Democrats becoming democratic socialists? Because Dr. Matthews, one of the things we've talked about on this program is that usually after the primaries, people race to the center. And this time, it doesn't appear that some Democrats are racing to the center. And you can talk about the governor's race in Florida. You can talk about the governor's race in New York. You can talk about some of these congressional races. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about some local ones here as well. Even the difference between, say, a Ted Cruz and a Representative O'Rourke. And so there are just all sorts of issues that I'd like to put on the table there as well. And before we're done here, we're going to do two things. First of all, Kelly does have an announcement. We're kind of waiting a little bit on that one. And I do want to mention some things about this Labor Day rally, because for those of you in Texas, you have a chance to meet the governor, the senator, and the attorney general, to mention just a few, all face-to-face this Monday. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Does the 14th Amendment automatically grant citizenship to anyone born in this country? That is the current policy of this government, but a number of constitutional scholars disagree. I've written about this in the past and want to focus on it again, but I've also noticed that a number of conservative lawyers who've been on my radio program accept the government's policy. So if you think the policy should be changed, I would recommend you start by convincing fellow conservatives and constitutionalists. Michael Anton is a lecturer at Hillsdale College, and he writes in the Washington Post that citizenship should not be a birthright. He says, quote, "The notion that simply being born within the geographical limits of the United States automatically confers U.S. citizenship is an absurdity, historically, constitutionally, philosophically, and practically." The purpose of the 14th Amendment was to resolve the question of citizenship of freed slaves. Essentially, it was needed to overturn the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. Second, the amendment specifies two criteria for American citizenship: birth or naturalization, and being subject to U.S. jurisdiction. It is that second point that has been used to justify birthright citizenship. Government officials argued that subject to the jurisdiction simply means they're subject to American law. Therefore, you can argue that a tourist is subject to the laws of America while in this country, but that appears to be a misreading of the amendment. Michael Anton says that the problem can be fixed if Congress would clarify legislatively that children of non-citizens are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and thus not citizens under the 14th Amendment. Although that may be true, he needs to start by convincing his fellow conservatives that such a change needs to be made. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the things I encourage you to do today is to especially take the time to visit the website pointofview.net. We have quite a number of articles, one by Karl Rove about the other House race. We haven't even gotten to that. Penna Dexter, of course, mentioned the one about household income jumping. There's one on blue-collar workers and how they feel that they're doing very well, but a very good piece that comes from Merrill Matthews at the Institute for Policy Innovation. By the way, go to ipi.org. We have a link to his website, and we've posted just this article, but a lot of your commentaries have been really good. But Dr. Matthews, one of the things you do, I love it so much. You say, let's put two charts here. Here's the stand of the Democratic Socialist of America, and here's the stand of the Democrats. And as I'm looking down the chart, check. Explain that for just a minute.
Well, yes, there is an organization, it's not a political party, called the Democratic Socialist of America.
Right.
And they've been promoting socialism for some time. So they have on their website, and it's easy to find it. You can go to it. They list the various things that they support. And when you read through that list, you say, did I get the right, or is this the Democratic Party of America? So you go back and look and say, no, this is the Democratic Socialist. So I decided, well, I'll just make a little chart and go down the list of things that they want to do. And of course, the Democratic Socialist website is not current to right today, so they don't necessarily, that I saw, say let's get rid of ICE, but I suspect if it had been updated over the last few months, it would say let's get rid of ICE and a few other things. But it's just right down the line of what they it looks like Bernie Sanders wrote it, and he might have.
Well, and again, I might just mention, we've posted your article. Of course, you can go to ipi.org, but we've posted it there where you can click a share button, put it on your Twitter feed, on your Facebook page. And Penna, this is something we've talked about before. There is a sense of doubling down. Healthcare, childcare, shelter, transportation, universal basic income.
Right. And those they say should be free to everybody, regardless of income.
Not to mention everything from abortion,
Shelter.
progressive shelter. I mean, and
It's kind
again,
of over the top.
Cynthia Nixon, for example, is running for the governorship in the state of New York, is trying to out left. The Governor Cuomo and some of these others, the newly elected, at least newly nominated, I guess you could say, in the primary, mayor from Tallahassee, now running for governor in the state of Florida, supported by Bernie Sanders. And I think he could check most of these down the list as well, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think the man running against Ted Cruz for Senate probably check most
Let's bring
of
it back
these.
to Texas. Yeah, okay.
That's a race I think a lot of people are shocked by. I mean, the idea if Texas were to lose a Republican senator to a Democrat senator, I mean, that would shake the whole country in pretty dramatic ways. I mean, I think that would say that maybe Texas is about to turn in some time in the future because the idea that that you can't win in a statewide race as a Republican would be just a huge blow to the Republican Party. Might even cost. I mean, we don't know, but I mean, it literally could cost the president the ability to appoint judges, including the next Supreme Court justice. So, and the idea that Texas would be the one that stopped the next justice from being appointed by the president. I mean, that would be the last state you'd pick. Maybe Utah. I don't know, but I mean, it would be one of the last.
We say that this is that election that sometimes the opposite party from the White House is the one that does well or does the best. And I think it's going to be a matter of how many people get involved, who really cares, motivation. And the anti-Trump it provides a natural motivation. So now that it's Labor Day, I think we ought to just really warn our listeners that sitting back and being apathetic about this is probably not a good idea right now. Because, I mean, here in Texas, we're seeing these polls between O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, and it's not looking great. I mean, it's very, very even in many of the polls. So, not only voting, but helping that candidate that you support.
Well, the Democrats have been predicting for years now that Texas was on the cusp of turning at least purple, if not blue. And they've poured a lot of money in here. So if Beto O'Rourke ends up winning, it sort of validates that long-time prediction. I'm still thinking I'm going to be surprised if that happens. Mm-hmm. But it is certainly closer than you would have expected.
And there was supposed to be a debate tonight.
Yeah, that was the other one I was going to bring up.
That was very interesting.
That did not happen.
Beto O'Rourke said he wanted all these debates, and then I think he said he wanted 6. Mm-hmm. And Ted Cruz said, okay, I'll do 5. And then all of a sudden, he's doing a little better now, O'Rourke is, and maybe he's decided he doesn't want to debate.
Well, he's going to go on Ellen DeGeneres.
Yeah, Ted Cruz offered him tonight, right?
Yeah. So there was supposed to be a debate tonight. Instead, he's going on Ellen DeGeneres. Beto O'Rourke is. So fascinating. Yeah, I think it would be, I think a debate with Ted Cruz is probably, scary. I'm sure he thought he needed whatever he could get, right, at the beginning. And now that he's in a closer race than he expected, I think he probably doesn't want any part of that because Ted Cruz is a Harvard Law graduated, very bright guy, can certainly debate the issues. But I just find it interesting that somebody was clamoring for debates, and then you give it to him, and then I think I'm a little busy. I'm going on Ellen DeGeneres.
Well, and let's go back around the round table on this. Would a debate help Representative O'Rourke because he's got a higher Q factor? I mean, this is a guy that's skateboarding in a parking lot, and here is an individual that travels with Willie Nelson, and of course the DWI is maybe going to hurt him a little bit, but it didn't seem to hurt George W. Bush, so maybe that's not going to be much. But everybody knows who Ted Cruz is. Some people still don't know who Beto O'Rourke is, so it gives him some visibility. But on the other hand, I think Ted Cruz is a pretty good debater, don't you think?
Ted Cruz is a very good debater. He brings some excitement there, and he knows the issues in very well. When you're running for Senate, you're expected to be an expert in everything.
That's exactly right.
And many of them aren't, let's say.
No.
But you're expected to. You're expected to be able to go from domestic policy to foreign policy and everything in between. And Ted's been up there long enough now to actually have the gravitas to be able to discuss those things. But sometimes even being the better debater doesn't necessarily win you the debate.
The big problem for Ted Cruz is he's being outraised like 3-1.
Right. Yeah.
And it's because people that, are supportive of Ted Cruz think, Ted Cruz, he's going to win Texas.
Yeah.
The problem is that means O'Rourke has a lot more money, and Texas is very expensive to do ads. So
you've got so many markets.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
who's out campaigning and who's in the Senate confirming, right? Is that an issue?
But just one part of Kelly's point is, Beto's out raising Ted Cruz in large part because all kinds of billionaire money is coming in.
California, everywhere else is coming in.
Yeah. I think Ted Cruz, he has to keep the likable side of his personality on display in these debates because he is so smart and he really can wipe the floor with you. With just about anyone. So if he keeps that going, which he's fully capable of doing, being charming, and and he debates the issues, I think he can do himself a lot of good. Plus, if he can get enough money to start running ads, I think that will help because the positions of O'Rourke are so far to the left, and it's not Texas.
Well, my understanding is he's got money ready to start running the ads, but he was waiting until after Labor Day. But I've heard complaints from people that they can't even get Ted Cruz signs for their yards.
That's right.
So you go to various areas in the Dallas area, and you see Beto O'Rourke signs all over the place, and you don't see the Ted Cruz signs. And that, I don't know how much that helps. I have heard, I do not know if it's true, that his campaign manager doesn't think signs are a good use of money.
That's true.
Having said that, if it's an expense that people they want to be able to put signs in their yard.
Yeah.
Well, one of the big ones, of course, is just the last week or so, I guess, you had the Beto O'Rourke, speech, on
the NFL players,
on how there's nothing more American than to during the national anthem to go to a knee. And of course, Ted Cruz responded, I can think of a lot of things that are more American.
And he's saying that on the campaign trail. I was watching an interview.
And so to me, is a perfect sort of division for who, the difference between the candidates. I mean, O'Rourke's speech was very, very moving and very, and played to a lot of those things. But I just, I think that between the Ted Cruz position and the Beto O'Rourke position in Texas, I think Cruz has got the winning position when it comes to the national anthem.
I would think so. And again, the complaint has always been from people that, we never have a choice. It's Tweedledee and Tweedledum. You cannot say that in the Senate race here in Texas. You cannot say that in the governor's race in Florida. You cannot say that in a lot of places. I mean, there are some really striking differences. Yep. And whether or not those debates surface those, I'm kind of glad that they didn't do a debate tonight because some of us like to go to high school football, which is where I'm heading out to, that big stadium there in Allen. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the Labor Day rally. Kelly has a very important announcement. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Saw some of you on Facebook saying, well, is this going to be like 1960 where Richard Nixon won the radio, but John Kennedy won the TV? Beto O'Rourke is better on TV. Would he win that debate? Love to get your comments right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, and we are going to give you a couple of announcements. The first one is, I just thought real quickly I'd mention something we've talked about earlier in the week, that this Monday there's a Labor Day rally. It's taking place in McKinney at the Cotton Mill, and when we announced it a couple of weeks ago, you had Governor Greg Abbott. Now, that's reason enough to go to hear Greg Abbott. But then, since that time, Senator Ted Cruz is going to be there. Now, I knew Ken Paxton would be there because his wife, Angela Paxton, is running in the Senate district there, Senate District 8. And then you're going to have all sorts of other people that we've had on the program. You're going to have Matt Shaheen. You're going to have Jeff Leach. I mean, we go down this long, long list of individuals. So let me just mention that if you would like to, the doors open at 9:30, but it'll be 10 a.m. on Monday, 10 to noon, at the Cotton Mill in McKinney. And if nothing else, Kelly, these are some opportunities, first of all, to meet these candidates. Second of all, to get some signs to put in your yard. And number 3, to sign up, for example, for maybe these clubs or to maybe walk some precincts, which is kind of what you've been talking about.
Yeah, people can get involved. They can actually do something. I think a lot of people feel like, what can I do? And what you find is, certainly in politics, at least, I mean, it's such a scary thing to people because they're like, I don't know anything about what to do. I don't even know how to get started. What you find out that is in politics, 90% of politics is just showing up. I mean, most people are busy. They don't have any time to do anything. And so I always tell people, find somebody that you really, support, that you like, that you'd like to help, and see how you can volunteer. I mean, they're running to be a public servant, and you are trying to serve as well. And that makes a big difference because they don't have a lot of money to spend on people. It's not like a business. And so it really is. The thing that decides a lot of these elections is the energy of which really results in the people and what they're willing to give of themselves to help a candidate because of what that candidate stands for, what difference that candidate will make. So step number 1 is just going and showing up to something and seeing what you have a passion for and saying, I can volunteer a little time for my country and do this.
And again, some of these races, we just talked about this national, if you will, nationalized Texas race. But let me look at some others. Pete Sessions, 32nd District. Mm-hmm. We've had Lisa Luby Ryan. I think that's going to be a really close race.
State House.
To mention just a few, Jeff Leach and Matt Shaheen, who I just mentioned a minute ago, were tight enough that I don't think it's going to be a problem, but you just don't know. And Penna, these are races where sometimes if you're just willing to make some phone calls, walk some precincts, it makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does. And, I think if that intimidation factor that you don't know what to do, you have tons of mentors out there because as soon as you show up at the rally, people will guide you and help you, whatever your interest is. Can you walk, on a Saturday? Well, here, let's do it together or whatever. So
put the app on your phone now. Have you seen these phone apps? These are incredible things.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of help out there.
Governor Abbott has actually been able to survey about 600,000 households. And if you put this on your phone, it is amazing because let's say you go up to 123 Main Street, and before you walk up there, it tells you, okay, Bob Smith and Sue Smith are there, and they voted in the last 2 elections, and it gives you some material. Then you talk to them, find out, there's also a child that's now 18 years of age. You add that in there. Before you walk to the next house, they've already updated that database, and Dr. Merrill Matthews.
So we used to pay lots of money. Campaigns would pay lots of money to get that information. Now it's just available for free for individuals.
And you and I, we kind of grew up walking precincts. When my dad ran for office and I was 12 years old, we just had pieces of paper and a clipboard. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, first the Democrats, now the Republicans are getting pretty high tech.
That's right. Barack Obama did that, started that, and they had the information down to the household, to the information of whether they had voted and so forth.
Data points like you can't imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you knew what was going on, and then from the Democrat standpoint, what they said was, we know who these voters are. Now we just have to get them out. So their goal from their various people was to make sure that those people didn't just know and were inclined to vote for Democrat, but to get them to the polls. And now Mitt Romney was supposed to try to do that. His effort did not work well, but it's expanded to the Republicans now, and it's become much more high tech.
Yeah, that's one of the things I know Donald Trump did really well in his election.
Right.
You had Reince Priebus that was working on that, but also you had somebody that was on the Trump business team that was like a guru, or I forget what the guy's name is now, but it was an expert on sort of targeted advertising.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And that's why they were actually going in with targeted messaging to Wisconsin and Michigan and these places that supposedly they didn't have a chance, but this guy was saying, oh no, I'm looking, it's interesting how sometimes the business,
right,
can really transfer over. I mean, sometimes it's like they're two different worlds, but I think when it comes to, if somebody's really sophisticated in making money for a business because they know how to do targeted advertising, how to reach people, how to know where they stand or what they believe or what they're interested in, that's pretty valuable if you can have somebody that's that good with the technology that's sort of running the campaign part of the digital technology. I mean, for instance, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they did maybe, was it $5 of advertising on, digital for every dollar they spent on TV. So they had determined it was much more effective use of the money because in TV, it's a spray
broadcast,
right? Whereas they could target the advertising in Facebook and these different places for exactly who they were looking to get the message to.
Yeah. And back to this rally, Penna, you were pointing out that people saying, well, I don't know if I can go and talk to people face to face. Well, you can also call them. And again, I've watched these little digital things where you dial it and most of the time you get voicemail. So you hit the button, it sends the message and you go on to the next one. So you can go through like 100 phone calls in an hour. And most of the time, you don't even talk to anybody. If you do,
this is where you're helping from home.
Yeah, you just can do all of those kinds of things. But one more, you can join a club, and you're part of Golden Quarter, aren't you? And it seems to me that sometimes the problem in these political situations is people say, "What can I do?" Really, it's what can we do? Talk about that.
Well, that's where I got my education in Texas politics. I was political, but when I moved here 28 years ago, I knew nothing about Texas. It was different. And so these ladies, and I found out about these ladies, and they educated me, and we were pretty much of a pro-life, pro-family, a lot of homeschooling moms. And it became a powerhouse club during the Clinton years. And, doing it, these become your friends, because when you're working alongside people for causes that you believe in, those people sometimes become your best friends because you're like-minded and you're sacrificing yourself for a greater cause. So I recommend clubs if you've got that inclination, and if you can be exposed then to people that you may never meet. You can meet a Greg Abbott easily. He'll probably come and speak at your club sometime.
Isn't that amazing? And again, you can meet them. So again, let me just mention Monday, 10 to 12, and it's in McKinney. And if you want to go there, Kelly Shackelford, I know you've been waiting to share with us some news, and let's again set this table. Anybody listening to Point of View has heard us talk about the Kuntz cheerleaders, and I've even had people say, now, wasn't that resolved? And I go, well, not really, but now it is.
Yeah, well, we hope. And that is the Kuntz cheerleaders, if you didn't know, this was cheerleaders who were tired of sort of kill and mash the other teams on their signs. So they said, what can we do that's encouraging? And so they said, Scripture's encouraging. So on their signs that they paid for with their money, their paint, this is the way it worked there. They started doing things like, if God is for you, who can be against you? And you can do all things through him who gives you strength. And, everybody loved it in the community. And then the Freedom from Religion Foundation sent a letter from across the country to the school district. And the next thing you knew, the school district was threatening the cheerleaders that they mentioned God, they were going to be punished. And so we ended up having to file a lawsuit. We won the lawsuit. They testified, these young ladies. They did a tremendous job. One of them was brought to tears on the stand, but she still shared the gospel with everybody in the courtroom. But we won the case. They appealed, and then we ended up winning at the State Court of Appeals, and then they appealed to the State Supreme Court. Well, just today, the Texas Supreme Court ruled in our favor and said, we don't need to take this case. The victory is in place at the Court of Appeals. And so we have a win for the cheerleaders and really a win for everybody who believes in freedom. The idea that the government can't come in and tell you, well, you can say things as long as you don't mention God. I mean, you can't do that. And so this is a great victory for really cheerleaders, for students all over the country, and really for every citizen. So we'll be, I mean, I don't even know if the press releases are out from our staff yet, because this just came in an hour or so ago, but they will start to see that. And certainly if they're at firstliberty.org, they can get material on this, because a press release will be coming out at First Liberty on this, and I'm sure Point of View will put it up as well.
Well, certainly will. It seems like every Friday we're getting an announcement. Penna, have you noticed a trend here? Well, last week he was
First
giving
Liberty
us an
is having some good
Yeah,
Fridays.
I'm going to have to keep coming on. I mean, Chaplain Squires last week, we got a victory in that case, and this week it's the Coons cheerleaders. So
this is such a long-running case. It's a great victory.
Yeah. By the way, if you go to First Liberty right now, they got the victory of Scott Squires and Casey Griffin, if you didn't hear that one. And I'm sure in just a few minutes they're going to have that one for the Coons cheerleaders. We'll be back right after this.
Healthy retirement planning is about more than just saving and investing well. It also involves seeing that your children acquire some skills in handling money. It's important to define and communicate boundaries regarding how much you'll help them, so they don't become a financial drain on your nest egg. Some parents are reluctant to think about letting go, writes Sue Schellenbarger, author of the Wall Street Journal's Work and Family feature. In a column titled, "Your Children Need a Launch Plan," Ms. Schellenbarger encourages parents to begin early to coach their kids in budgeting and saving. She also warns parents not to allow their emotions to overrule fiscal common sense. Several financial advisors she interviewed for her column told her this can be challenging. Matthew Papazian, founding partner of Cardin Capital Partners in Denver, says, parents like to be proud of the lifestyle they provide their kids. But he's seen retirement plans derailed by parents who help their kids with things like home purchases they couldn't otherwise afford. He guides his clients in formulating launch plans for their offspring, and when necessary, he'll provide some of the coaching himself. According to a recent study from Pew Research, in 2016, 1/3 of young adults ages 25 to 29 were living in multi-generational households, typically with parents. Sometimes these young adults genuinely need the help, and family togetherness can be great. But parents should ask themselves, are they using financial strings to control their adult children? Are they sending the message that they don't think their kids can make it? Another financial planner, Deborah Meyer of St. Charles, Missouri, advises parents to begin early with their children to instill the mindset that you can do it. If you're able to provide well for them, still, let them work for some things. Teaching kids financial discipline will set them on a healthy path, and it's a good way to preserve your own portfolio. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and in the next hour, we're going to get into so many other issues. Again, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and Penna, let me come to you for just a minute, because when I first heard the name Kuntz, that's a name of a city in Texas, and since that time, I've been hearing it so often, but this is a long-running case, and I think there's some lessons we can learn from that, don't you think?
Yes, this was an inspiring story from day one. And, Kuntz, Texas, I'd never heard of it either until the case, till First Liberty took on the case. And when these cheerleaders stood up for the ability to just put scriptures on these run-through banners, it became a Facebook phenomenon. young kids, and a lot of cheerleading squads all across the country were inspired. Others started doing the same thing in their areas, and they were rooting for, Christians were praying for these girls. And it was really, I mean, think about when you're in high school. You might think it's a cute and nice idea to put scripture on the banners, but when you're then suddenly asked to go to court and testify and, you know, fight your school district and all those in authority, people who have sway over what your grades are going to be, and these girls were really brave, and it was an inspiration to the whole nation.
Yeah, it really was incredible. I mean, they were all had to go through depositions. I mean, these are 14, 15-year-old girls. One of the coolest days I remember was at First Liberty. We have a prayer team. There are people who say, "Hey, I just want to be on the prayer list. I want to pray for the cases." And so we send out an email every week to the prayer team. I remember an email went out, and all it did is it had the name of every cheerleader and the time of their deposition. And I didn't know. I didn't prepare that. Somebody else on staff did. And so I got this email because I'm on the prayer team, and along with other hundreds or whatever people. But I got that, and I just thought, now this is really cool. You know, that everybody's getting these. They're seeing these girls, and they're seeing what time their deposition starts. And they did a fabulous job. And the amazing thing is, you know, people always say, well, what can I do? I don't have any power. I'm not a political leader, or I'm not a whatever. Well, you know, these 14 and 15-year-old girls had no power. And they lived in a town with 2,100 people. And yet they've now been in the New York Times 4 times. They've been in the Wall Street Journal 4 times. They were in the L.A. Times 3 times. And the last article I read there ended with a scripture verse. So I don't know if that reporter's been let go or not. But, I mean, that was a pretty nice little coup. And their Facebook page, again, even though they lived in a town of 2,100 people, last I checked, it's been a while, they had like 60,000 followers on their Facebook page of people around the world saying, look at what we're doing with Scripture in our community because of your example. So it just shows how being faithful, God can multiply in lots of ways. And the idea that, oh, I don't have any power, I can't do anything, that's a lie straight from not God. Because the truth is, we're all made in the image of God, and we can, if we'll just be faithful, great things happen. And these girls are a great example of that.
Yeah, and I think this says something for First Liberty Institute, too, because those families couldn't have funded this thing. So to have First Liberty come along beside them and provide the expertise and the funding, I mean, that made all the difference.
Yeah, and it's great now because they were faithful, we now have a precedent that now protects millions of other students around the country, and making sure that, you know, when they have a right to speak at school, which they do, that the school can't come in and say, well, you can speak as long as you don't mention God or as long as you don't mention Scripture. You know, that's religious viewpoint discrimination. It's against the First Amendment. It's not allowed. And they've now set a precedent that's going to protect millions of other students who are going to come in their footsteps.
And does the precedent only reside then in Texas? I mean, if the same issue came up in Oklahoma, it wouldn't necessarily carry there.
It wouldn't control in Oklahoma, but it would be very persuasive, because if somebody in Oklahoma was in state court and they hadn't dealt with this, they'd look for something similar, and they would immediately see this opinion and the rationale, and they would say, and by the way, all the rationale is, is perfectly applicable across the country. It's free speech, right? So it would be really persuasive, I think, in other places.
Just think how much money the school district has spent to go after these girls and what they did.
We were talking about this today, so we're not going to be surprised if they don't appeal this to the United States Supreme Court, which we think will be a waste of time, but we just think they're so, just unflinching in the fact that they want the ability to take away the rights of these students. Their argument is that, no, that's not their speech, it's government speech. And since it's government speech, we control it, and they don't have free speech. I mean, that's a frightening argument. If we're all made into government actors because, like, we're on a public sidewalk or, in a park, or you come up with the argument, then we've all lost our free speech, and that's what they were trying to do with these cheerleaders.
Has there been? This is the school district that's doing.
That's
that.
right.
So it's not a separate group. It's a school district that's doing. So has there been a backlash from the public there to push those superintendents or whoever out?
Evidently not. That's what I find a lot of times. These school board members just kind of cave into their attorneys, and they let their attorneys do things, and the public doesn't seem to understand what's going on, and they don't usually hold people to account. But I think that would stop a lot of this, is if the people in the communities would say, this is unacceptable. This is, we're going to get rid of you. I actually saw it happen a number of years ago. I was down in outside of Waco in a small community, and they had asked us, can we have a prayer at graduation? And we said, well, you can, but it has to be done in a certain way. For instance, you don't determine it will be prayer. You have a student that can make an opening statement, and they can do it how they want. They have to be respectful, but and if they want to pray, they can pray. And so we went and walked them through because of the law in that federal Court of Appeals area. We said, here's how you can do it. Well, they voted they didn't want to do it. And so the people of the community were kind of incensed because they wanted there to be a prayer at the graduation. So there was an election between then and the graduation, and there were 3 people up, and the 3 people up had all voted against it. So they replaced all of them, and they had a prayer at their graduation. So people are in control of their school district, their whatever, as long as they want to be, and so they certainly can take control of these situations.
And it seems to me one other lesson is the lesson of the girls. They could have just said, okay, we won't do that. But they said, no, we're going to see if we can pursue that. Or even when you stepped in and said, we'll help you, they could have said, no, that's just fine. So
right.
We lose our liberty if we don't stand up for it.
That's right. People have to be willing to stand, and they need to realize that they're not just standing for themselves. They're standing for a lot of other people who are going to come in their footsteps and the freedoms that are going to be available to them.
Yeah, and they're not 14 years of age anymore, are they? This has been a long road.
It has. It's been going on a number of years. But this is a good victory, and it's a good victory that people around the country can use in their own communities if necessary.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to work our way around the round table. We've got a couple of articles, one by Karl Rove about the other House race. That gets into the whole issue of gerrymandering and some other issues and what is at stake nationally. We're also, of course, coming back to that idea of the income jumping and how the blue-collar workers are doing, the Mueller investigation, and a couple of those. Also, Kelly gave an award to the president, so we're going to have that, and we have a video that you can watch on that. And so there are just a lot of topics we're going to address. Let me just, as we're coming to a break, recognize that we'll now go to our national program. So I thought just one more time I'd mention those of you in the state of Texas that you can, again, go to that Labor Day rally. It takes place Monday, 10 o'clock at the Cotton Mill in McKinney, Texas. And if you want more information, of course, we can get to that as well. Let's take a break, and if you'd like to follow these cases, we have a link to everything from First Liberty to the Institute for Policy Innovation and, of course, Penna Dexter's commentary. It's a lot we've got on the website, so take the time to read those, pass them on to others. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today, and I appreciate you joining us as you start your Labor Day weekend. We're going to be talking about lots of issues in the news. First of all, of course, we are in the midst of elections, and a lot of people say that Americans really don't pay attention to even the midterm elections until after Labor Day. Well, Monday is Labor Day, so we're going to be talking about that. One of the articles we've posted here by Karl Rove, The Other House Race, and talking about the significance of that and what that might mean, not only in terms of looking at the national, but what happens in the state legislatures, which a few years from now are going to redraw some of those districts. We, of course, will next week have the hearings for Brett Kavanaugh, and I know Kelly Shackelford is going to be on a program that you are going to want to watch, so we'll talk about that in just a minute. You're going to be in the hearing rooms, I think, on Wednesday, so we'll talk about those issues. Well, I mentioned Kelly Shackelford. Of course, he was with the president on Monday. We'll get back to that a little bit later. And then, of course, a lot of economic news. Penna Dexter, we've talked about before. House income jumps. That's our second article we've posted here. And so that is the case. And, of course, I've mentioned Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Let me also mention Dr. Merrill Matthews, your piece on Are Democrats Becoming Democrat Socialists? So we have a full roundtable of discussions. But, Penna, let me start out with economic news for just a minute. That is something that is not covered very well by the mainstream press, but we'll cover it.
Well, those two stories you mentioned are Buddy's story about Democrat socialists and then household income jumping. If we get what the Democrats seem to be running on in many races, we're not going to have stories like this because everybody's going to be paying their taxes are just going to be off the charts to pay for all these things like Medicare for all or, a living wage for the whole country, whatever.
Guaranteed income.
And
that's not speculation. That's part of the Democratic platform.
Right,
I mean,
they want to raise taxes.
Yeah,
they want to reverse
Nancy
the tax
Pelosi
cuts.
said we want to eliminate the tax cut legislation and put those taxes back.
So, maybe there's a generation or some voters out there who need an education on, that these things don't just drop out of the sky. Somebody has to pay for them, and it's we, the taxpayer.
Let me get into the elections for just a minute. We'll talk about the House, and then, of course, the Senate gets us into Brett Kavanaugh for just a minute. But, there are various individuals, 538, for example, have put together the forecast, which we've seen before, suggesting that it is quite possible that Democrats could take over the House of Representatives. But the other piece that I've posted here by Karl Rove is something that people don't think about, not only looking at what happens in Congress, but, Penna, what happens in the legislature, because the individuals you elect to your state legislature in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in Texas, in New York, in Alaska, whatever, are in some cases going to be drawing those congressional districts. And as I've said before, when it comes to the Senate, the people select their senators, but when it comes to the Congress selects their people, because those gerrymandered districts determine whether or not you have a safe district or whether you have a competitive district. And Karl Rove estimates, maybe 60 races out of 435 are competitive, something like that?
Yeah, so that shows the power of the state legislatures to draw the districts. And certainly I think it's 2021 when they'll next do this. And so what that does, it's a huge effort. And it's often very complicated and contested in the courts. But people are throwing accusations of racism and other things in these fights over the districts. But you can get a fairly safe district if you're districted correctly as a member of the House.
And one of the problems here, and Kelly can probably speak to this better than I can, the states draw the districts, but they're required under the Supreme Court to be able to make sure that there are districts that are going to be essentially safe for minorities. So you're sort of stuck with, you've got smaller populations in the minorities, but you've got to make sure, and because it's minorities tend not to vote as high, it can't be just 51%. It tends to have to be more like 55 or 60% minority, which means you have to draw these sort of convoluted lines sometimes to make sure you get that. Of course, you also have pressure for people saying, I want to make sure I have a safe district in there from others, but it's not just as easy. I mean, I would like it if they just put a grid across the state and
me too.
They look something like our counties, all the square counties that are in there.
You get fingers and toes and
branches. That would be fine with me, but they have to do these things as a way to make sure, to ensure that some minorities are done. And that sort of pushes this notion of convoluted lines.
Yeah, and that reminds me, Meryl, of something else big that happened this week. I mean, what you're describing is really, it's discrimination. I mean, the idea that you want to try to have a result in a certain district based on somebody's race is racism. And it reminds me of the lawsuit that is going on against Harvard and these schools, that the Justice Department this week announced that they were, of interest and were siding with the plaintiffs. I mean, the story, which, do we have that up on?
We do. It's the last article there. Again, how blatant racism could end affirmative action.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. The first the article is excellent because it started out with this guy who had a perfect score on the ACT. He's number 2 out of a graduating class of 1,000 people. He is an accomplished singer and piano player, like a state champion or something, piano player. And 6 of the 7 Ivy League schools rejected him. Why? Because he's Asian.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this reverse discrimination. It's, we want certain other races, and so they're excluding the most high quality candidate. And so, all that does is beget more racism. I mean, it just creates, when you're a victim of discrimination because of your race, it makes you, naturally it would make you, upset at other races, and you become more racist. So, I mean, it's bad. We shouldn't look at people based upon their race. We should look at them based upon their qualifications. And look, if there are certain racial harms in the past where you need to provide opportunity, but you don't look to force results, because that's really unhealthy for everybody.
But it's fair to say the Supreme Court has sort of opened this door by saying race can be considered in these issues.
Just how much?
But just how much. And so various schools and others are trying to work through that and try to figure out exactly where's the line where we're including it, but it's not a compelling or deciding factor. And I where are the schools on this?
Yeah, and then that's the question is going to be: is that going to change now that we have a court that's changing?
I think it will.
And yeah. I do. I think that's going to change. Where I think we're going to try to be colorblind more in the future, but we'll see. We'll see if after the Justice Kavanaugh gets on the court, which I predict will be by the very beginning of October.
Yes.
We'll see if that changes even then.
Back to the redistricting issue. Of course, the national parties try to influence this, and I've noticed that there's a new entity called the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, founded by former Attorney General Eric Holder. And Barack Obama is very much involved in this. They see they see that that's the way, or one of the big ways you gain power, and that's where our former president has put a lot of his effort, his community organizing efforts.
Well, again, that's the first article here. We don't quote Karl Rove too often, but it had some great facts and figures and statistics and things like that. And if nothing else, it's a reminder that don't just pay attention to your Senate race or your congressional race. Pay attention to these individuals in these state legislatures, and those are important too. We come back, though, let's move to the Senate and Brett Kavanaugh and some other very important announcements coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Does the 14th Amendment automatically grant citizenship to anyone born in this country? That is the current policy of this government, but a number of constitutional scholars disagree. I've written about this in the past and want to focus on it again, but I've also noticed that a number of conservative lawyers who have been on my radio program accept the government's policy. So if you think the policy should be changed, I would recommend you start by convincing fellow conservatives and constitutionalists. Michael Anton is a lecturer at Hillsdale College, and he writes in the Washington Post that citizenship should not be a birthright. He says, quote, "The notion that simply being born within the geographical limits of the United States automatically confers U.S. citizenship is an absurdity, historically, constitutionally, philosophically, and practically." The purpose of the 14th Amendment was to resolve the question of citizenship of freed slaves. Essentially, it was needed to overturn the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. Second, the amendment specifies two criteria for American citizenship: birth or naturalization, and being subject to U.S. jurisdiction. It is that second point that has been used to justify birthright citizenship. Government officials argued that subject to the jurisdiction simply means they're subject to American law. Therefore, you can argue that a tourist is subject to the laws of America while in this country, but that appears to be a misreading of the amendment. Michael Anton says that the problem can be fixed if Congress would clarify legislatively that children of non-citizens are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and thus not citizens under the 14th Amendment. Although that may be true, he needs to start by convincing his fellow conservatives that such a change needs to be made. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Merrill Matthews, and Kelly Shackelford. And Kelly, let me come to you for just a few minutes because, first of all, starting on Wednesday, there will be questions being asked by the senators of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. My commentary coming out there, and I even used some of the questions that George Will came up with. These are the questions I should have been asking him. We know that these are going to be really strange questions. But what about this? Because this particular piece we posted earlier, you know, the Supreme Court nominee is thorough, fair-minded, committed to religious freedom. So it should be something that would be a slam dunk. But we have Democrats asking for more documents after receiving more than 1 million documents. He's written on, 300 plus opinions?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that. And you're going to be in the courtroom, or you're going to be in the Senate room, right?
Yes, I'll be in the hearing. This is kind of one of those things that everybody knows that this is all disingenuous. We've got to oppose Brett Kavanaugh because he's, going to be a judge that's more consistent, with, an originalist, a judicial minimalist, not a person who thinks he's a legislator. And it wouldn't matter. I mean, again, to me, the best example of what's going on the other side was when Gorsuch was picked. And I think everybody kind of realizes Gorsuch is about as solid a pick as you're going to get as far as being a good judge. The whole country kind of could see that. And they had they were standing out in front of the Supreme Court with a sign, and it said, "Stop, Judge," and it had a blank because they didn't know which judge they were going to choose, and so they had to write in Gorsuch. And to me, that's the visual for what's going on here. Brett Kavanaugh is an incredibly experienced judge. He's got 307 opinions that they can read. He's really well respected, not just on the right, on the left. I mean, one of the persons scheduled to testify is one of the most well-known liberal law professors in the country from Yale. He's got others, a number of other leading liberal people that say, look, you just can't say he wouldn't be an excellent judge. He would. He's not as liberal as I would like him to be on things, but he's an excellent judge. He has the top competency. He's shown incredible restraint. His opinions below have led the Supreme Court. I think, there's a large number of time that the court has taken his reasoning, his approach, the Supreme Court, and said, that's the way we're going. And so I just don't think they have anything. So when you don't have anything on substance, you go after process. So that's kind of what they're doing. We want more documents. Well, it's a record number. They've never handed over this many documents for a Supreme Court justice hearing like this ever, and it's still not enough for them.
And they already had 300 opinions to look at.
Exactly.
And hypocrisy is Democrats who couldn't be bothered with reading the 2,700 pages of Obamacare want millions of pages on Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and look, let's compare this, okay? Elena Kagan, she didn't have any opinions. Okay, she was obviously a liberal justice on the Supreme Court. They didn't have any opinions to look at. The Republicans asked for her documents because that's pretty important, and they just turned over a small number of documents. The Democrats did,
and some Republicans still voted for her.
Yeah, and she's on the court. So I think people can see through this. They're going to scream and yell and say all kinds of crazy stuff, but the reality is, this is a judge who's respected by people all around him. He's a brilliant individual. He's got a track record. 307 opinions. Good grief, at the Federal Court of Appeals. All you need is that. You can tell a judge by that if you read those opinions. Now, for point of view listeners, they might say, well, what's he like as a person or whatever? He's a guy who's committed to religious freedom. Almost 20 years ago, he donated his time with myself and Jay Sekulow on a Supreme Court case. To me, a young attorney who's donating their time for religious freedom, that's a really good person. That's a person who, instead of advancing their career, is taking time where they could be billing, and they're saying, no, I care about the Constitution. I care about religious freedom. And I think it says it all as the picture they took of him on the cell phone the night he was announced.
Yes.
He was announced, there he was with the president, and then later that night, did he say, look, I just got nominated for the presidency. I'm not going to go and do my normal duty at my church. No, he showed up at his church. He was serving people in a food kitchen, and somebody snapped a photo of him off their cell phone. So he wasn't posing for a photo. They kind of caught him, and to me that says who he is, and this is the kind of judge we want on the Supreme Court.
I might just mention they did pro bono for you. This is a story about the pro bono he did for a Jewish group as well. Yep. Kirkland and Ellis. So he, on more than a few occasions, did pro bono work. And when you're a rising attorney, that's really kind of a distraction. So that says a lot about his character too, doesn't it?
It does. It shows you're willing to sacrifice at a time when you could be sort of trying to raise your own career. Instead, you're thinking about others, and that's what you want as a judge. Judges, I just want people to think when they're listening to this. It would be if you are appointed for life, and you can do whatever you want as a judge, essentially on your decisions. It's tempting for you to do what you think is right, no matter what the law says. Okay, and that's a tension. So we want people that have humility, that are actually going to say, you know what, this is not about what I want to do, because I'm going to subject myself underneath the people and the legislation that they pass, and I'm simply going to apply the law that they passed, and I'm going to do it the most faithful way I can. You've got to have people of humility in order to do that, and Brett Kavanaugh is exactly that kind of person. So I think he's going to get on the court, and I think he's going to do an excellent job. And I think, I'm scheduled tonight to be on Shannon Bream on Fox News to talk about him because this next week is a big week. It's coming up, and this will be a Supreme Court. The hearings will be next week. Probably a couple of weeks later, they'll have the vote, and then by October, the idea is he will be on the court when the court starts sitting again.
The left and the pro-abortion left talks about him as being extreme. But I think that even if we didn't have Donald Trump as president, we had one of the more moderate people that ran, maybe a Jeb Bush or something, he would have still been a nominee, very possibly, for the Supreme Court. I mean, he's just well known, and he is on the DC circuit, which is
kind of
sort
the farm
of the
team.
farm team. And he's written such good opinions and so many. So, they are really, I think this is a good fundraising opportunity for certain parties to be able to speak about this and to really blast him. But in the long run, I think he's going to be good.
I want to go around the round table, too, and get your guess on who will or will not vote for him, because we don't have a John McCain, and we haven't said anything about John McCain. We will before the end of the program, although we did earlier in the week. And I don't know, but if my name is Joe Manchin and I'm in West Virginia, even if the Democrats say we can't vote for him, I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Merrill Matthews?
I think Joe Manchin probably will. Heidi Heitkamp might very well do it. And then, of course, I think the Governor Ducey of Arizona will have appointed, and by the state law, as I understand, has to appoint somebody from the same party.
Right.
So my guess is you'll have another Republican in there.
And does that happen quick?
I suspect it'll
he
happen
said he's
quickly.
waiting until after. He doesn't want to do anything until McCain is buried and the funerals and everything are over. And then I think soon after there he will. But he said publicly he did not want to do that right now. But yeah, I think they're right, because the vote will probably be. I'm hearing that the vote is going to be September 24th.
Mm-hmm.
And if the vote is September 24th, I think there's plenty of time probably to get a replacement. And I think you're right. I mean, they'll almost for sure vote in favor of the nominee.
What about a Claire McCaskill, John Tester? What about that? I mean,
I think there's going to be at least 4 or 5 Democrat votes. I don't know if people have seen these polls, but it's always, when you look at the polls of the justices that are the people that are nominated, it's like even. So, like, the poll they showed for Kavanaugh was like 47-46. Now, most of those people have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know who these people are. But what's interesting is if you look at these states where you have these Democrats who are in Trump-elected states, like Manchin and Heitkamp and Connolly in Indiana and McCaskill, it's amazing what those polls say. They're like 60-25 in favor of Kavanaugh. Some of them 60-30, but they're all heavy in favor of Kavanaugh. So I will be shocked if those Democrats actually vote against the nominee, because I think that will pretty much assure a real problem with their reelection if they do. So I think you're going to see 4 or 5 Democrat votes and all the Republican votes.
I just mentioned, since we're coming to a break, you're going to be on tonight, you said, so we can watch
Shannon Bream, which is 11 Eastern, 10 Central, but I'm probably going to be on later, like 10:30, 11:30, depending upon your time zone. But I'm supposed to be talking about Kavanaugh because it's all coming up next week.
Yeah, well, stay up late. It's Labor Day weekend. You can watch Kelly on Shannon Bream, and we got a lot more to cover, but we need to take one of those breaks. By the way, if you'd like to join us, maybe we've said something already you'd like to comment on, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and Merrill Matthews. And again, we have a lot of material we've posted. By the way, we're going to come back to this in just a minute, but we have the video of Kelly Shackelford of giving an announcement and an award at the Legions, American Legion, and also some information about the Defenders of Religious Freedom Honor. And so that is there. But I wanted to wait another few minutes because we're going to post a press release that just come out. And Kelly, it seems like every Friday you got another announcement. So we're going to wait for a minute and keep people in suspension until we get that press release. And so while we're waiting for that, let's get, if we can, go to Dr. Merrill Matthews' piece. Should Democrats change their name to Democratic Socialist? I just love your articles because what you do is you look at a group that does exist, Democratic Socialist of America. Mm-hmm. That is an organization, and go to their website and look at their various stands. That's one column. And then let's look at the Democratic Party in the other. And I'm looking at check. There is an incredible overlap. Remember those Venn diagrams when grade school? There's almost a perfect overlap. What about that?
It is almost a perfect overlap. And so the Democrats have been moving increasingly towards the socialism. That's where the majority of Democrats now in recent polling from Gallup says, I think 57% think socialism is a good thing. So they're actually approving that, and they're moving in that. That's where all the energy and excitement is toward more socialist policies. And so the notion that they changed their name, I think, is just truth in advertising. Because that's where they're moving. You know, even in our discussion about Brett Kavanaugh, the opposition is, you know, typically, historically, you had Republicans and Democrats voting for Supreme Court candidates from either side of the party.
Right.
If the person was qualified, you had a number of them would vote for it. They're getting this pressure not because Brett Kavanaugh isn't qualified, but because the far left of the party is saying, you vote for this and we will primary you, we will get you out. That's what's driving this. That's the heart of the Democratic Party these days.
You know, we had somebody call in the other day and say, wait a minute, you're saying that all Democrats are socialists. And I'm saying, no. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of Democrats that are saying, I'm concerned about where the leadership of the party's going. But it is somewhat true that most socialists are either Democrats or independents, in the case of Bernie Sanders. Right. But it's not true that all Democrats are socialists. But there are a lot of individuals now. There's these hashtags and others saying, I'm leaving the party because the party has left me.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, the issues that are in, and again, I encourage people to look at this list. I mean, do you believe in a guaranteed living wage? In other words, no matter whether you work or not, the government is going to pay you a certain level. You know, guaranteed, you know, that the government provide a place for you. I mean, again, you don't have to pay for it, right? You get a place to live. You know, guaranteed medical care, right? Yeah. Which, by the way, they've looked at that, and I think it would add, how many trillions was that going to add?
About 32 trillion.
32 trillion. It would completely bankrupt the country. I mean, we would just completely implode immediately. So this is all this sort of pie in the sky kind of socialism that says, boy, it'd be great if everybody had everything and didn't have to work for it. Now, the reality is, no, it wouldn't. God didn't make us that way. He made us to actually work for things. And he made us to actually do better when we actually have to take care of things and have responsibility. You know, I mean, that's kind of how he started. The socialism doesn't work. It's never worked. And it's scary that people are getting such a bad education that people now don't get it. Again, it's not most Americans, but it's too many Americans. And I really hope, and I think I'm a little too optimistic on this, but I really hope in this election cycle, with a number of these people running as socialists, I hope that their opponents do a good job of having a real discussion about what that means, what that looks for, and that people can be educated and understand how incredibly damaging that would be. But, you know, we'll have to see. Are people able to handle the issue and argue and debate it and educate people?
I think that's a possibility that can happen. I remember when there was more than one nationally televised debate between Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz about health care.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was
informative.
It was informative, and it was so easy to, see what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. And, I am shocked, buddy, when we talk about socialism, that people are even willing to call themselves socialists. Some of these candidates can call themselves that.
Embrace it. They think this is where we need to move.
That's right.
Governor's
but they
race
use the word,
in Florida,
and that word
Governor's
used to
race
be
in
a
New York.
negative.
Yeah.
Right. It used to be a negative. And to make a distinction, you can believe that there needs to be viable safety nets in the country to take care of people who fall through the cracks and things like that. And you can even want to have a robust safety net, as maybe Sweden and some of those others do. But what's happening is that when you're moving towards socialism, you're wanting to say, we're going to give the government more control over the means of production. And so you have Elizabeth Warren just introducing legislation recently, which was going to, if you're a company with more than $1 billion in revenue, there would be a committee set up by the federal government which could decide how you spend your profits. You would have to have the government would be able to make a decision about how those profits. You would bring in what she called stakeholders, so labor, other groups would be able to have a say in what happens with those profits and so forth. And I went and checked how many companies in the U.S. make more or have revenues of over $1 billion. It's, if I remember right, it's like 1,300. So it's not a small number. It's not a huge number, but it's not a small number. So you would have the federal government, a committee of the federal government, determining what they do with their profits. And this is all because they don't like the notion that some companies are taking their money and buying back their stocks, which is in a way of sort of getting rid of some of their debt. They're getting rid of that money that they owe out there. So it's that's moving towards socialism.
Well, I really hope. I mean, again, the Democratic Party is the one who's really in a bind right now for a few reasons. Now, they've got this. The only thing that keeps them together is just anti-Trump, hate Trump, hate Trump, hate Trump. But otherwise, I mean, what is the issue they're running on? And this is where they're having. And whenever that's forced, this is where you start seeing the divide, right? I mean, if they take over the House, what are they going to be doing in the House? Everybody knows what they're going to be doing. They're going to be trying to impeach Trump. Now, even though they can impeach in the House, it'll never go through the Senate. It takes a 2/3 vote, and that's just not going to. I mean, or is it 3/4? I'm trying to think. Anyway, it's not going to happen. And so all they'll be doing is that, but they're not supposed to talk about it, right? Because nobody really wants that. And so I think the same thing you're watching, though, on these other issues, a living wage, all these things we talked about, these socialism. You see Schumer and others saying, no, don't talk about that. Don't go there.
Abolish ICE.
Abolish ICE. That's another one. I think you've got this real split in the Democratic Party. The fissure started with Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that's really developing, and you've got a real battle for the soul of the Democratic Party.
And the problem for the moderate Democrats is the media don't care about them.
That's right.
They're not going to be covering this. You can be a moderate Democrat. Joe Manchin doesn't get a lot of press. If you go out and say, I want socialism, I want universal basic income, blah, 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 that's where the media goes. So the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she gets the attention. Yep. So even if the Democratic Party weren't moving that way, it would appear to be that way because of so much media attention.
And people need to realize, if you get to the point where half of the Democratic Party is that way, is socialist, then it's gone, because you're a candidate and you can't afford to not please that base that can throw you out in the primary.
Right.
You can't even get to the general election. So this is really important for the country, or we're liable to have some really extreme kind of situations in our elections. But it is a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party that's going on right now.
Well, again, for our listeners in California, they've seen that there are a number of leftists over there that say that Dianne Feinstein is not liberal enough.
Amazing. Right.
For our listeners in New York, or just anybody that happened to be watching YouTube the other day, you saw the debate with Cynthia Nixon of Sex and the City fame, making it look like the current governor of New York is not liberal enough.
Right.
And then for our listeners in Florida, the Democrat there is pretty much taken on the socialist ideas from start to finish and endorsed by Bernie Sanders. So you have, as you said, individuals that are what used to be an outlier position is now becoming somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, and this is going to be fascinating elections to watch. I mean, there's some people who are in these communities, but I think everybody, even if you don't have a socialist running in your district, they're running all over the country, running as socialists. This is not my, label. This is their label. And the whole country is going to be watching. I mean, there's going to be a TV camera on those races, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And again, I am hopeful that we will get education, that people will begin to see. I'm hoping that people will see that what's happening right now, the reduction of regulations, et cetera, and how the economy is being unleashed. I hope that people learn that, but you wonder, are they going to learn that?
Well, we'll take a break, and we'll take your phone calls, too, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Healthy retirement planning is about more than just saving and investing well. It also involves seeing that your children acquire some skills in handling money. It's important to define and communicate boundaries regarding how much you'll help them, so they don't become a financial drain on your nest egg. Some parents are reluctant to think about letting go, writes Sue Schellenbarger, author of the Wall Street Journal's Work and Family feature. In a column titled, "Your Children Need a Launch Plan," Ms. Schellenbarger encourages parents to begin early to coach their kids in budgeting and saving. She also warns parents not to allow their emotions to overrule fiscal common sense. Several financial advisors she interviewed for her column told her this can be challenging. Matthew Papazian, founding partner of Cardin Capital Partners in Denver, says, parents like to be proud of the lifestyle they provide their kids. But he's seen retirement plans derailed by parents who help their kids with things like home purchases they couldn't otherwise afford. He guides his clients in formulating launch plans for their offspring, and when necessary, he'll provide some of the coaching himself. According to a recent study from Pew Research, in 2016, 1/3 of young adults ages 25 to 29 were living in multi-generational households, typically with parents. Sometimes these young adults genuinely need the help, and family togetherness can be great. But parents should ask themselves, are they using financial strings to control their adult children? Are they sending the message that they don't think their kids can make it? Another financial planner, Deborah Meyer of St. Charles, Missouri, advises parents to begin early with their children to instill the mindset that you can do it. If you're able to provide well for them, still, let them work for some things. Teaching kids financial discipline will set them on a healthy path, and it's a good way to preserve your own portfolio. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you for just a minute, because that Gallup survey has been one that's been asked year after year. So you can kind of do an apples to apples. And you went from a time in which at one point Democrats had a very significant support of capitalism to the most recent one where 57%, a majority of Democrats, view socialism more favorably. Only 47% viewed capitalism favorably. During that same period of time, you've had, in round numbers, about 7 in 10, 71% of Republicans that had a favorable view of capitalism. So Republicans have not changed in their view about capitalism. Democrats have. Now, again, we recognize they don't always identify what they mean by capitalism, and given the word capitalist has been degraded in popular culture, I mean, if you see a movie and you see the guy's a businessman or a capitalist, you know he's going to be a bad guy. Okay, I got that. But Gallup poll said they believe it's possible that the drop in the Democrats' positive view of capitalism is related to Donald Trump's presidency. Maybe. But I think it's also due, as they point out, to the rise of Senator Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, don't you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think they have they've captured the sort of the mind of the Democratic Party, the California Democrats now, which is sort of one of the major states driving the Democratic agenda. They've already adopted for the Democratic Party universal basic income. That's part of it. They've adopted a proposal to allow a state-based single health care system in California, which Gavin Newsom has been out saying as governor, he would not only do that for every citizen of California, he would do it for all illegals in California, which if you're going to have universal coverage, then the illegals get to go in there as well. So I think you're going to find those voices strong in the Democratic platform come 2020, and that may very well guide what the Democratic platform says. And so if you're a Democratic candidate, you got to sort of go with most of that.
I think the main problem, I mean, again, Merrill might come up with more, but to me, always the main problem with socialism is it totally misunderstands the depravity of man. And the fact that if you told everybody in your math class that they're all getting a 70 no matter what they turn in, do you really think you're going to get good work for people? I mean, you're not. And we need that responsibility. We need that competition. It brings out our best. It brings out we're creating the image of God, and it brings out that creativity. You know, the best example I can give, we had a contest that we did at our school years ago. I remember Kerby remembers this. It was Kohl's had done this contest where if you got enough Facebook likes,
remember that,
you could get what was it, 100,000 or was it 500,000?
It was 500,000 for the school.
Per school. 20 schools were going to win, and so we had a little Christian school that needed 500,000 to buy the land to put their school on, and so we started doing things. And what was interesting is the first 30 days, you couldn't see who was in what place and how many votes they had. And the last 30 days you could. And it was unbelievable to watch this. At the end of the first 30 days, I think the winner had maybe 15,000 votes or 20,000 votes. I think it was 15. But all of a sudden now everybody was watching the other people. And they were trying to get better at getting votes than the other people, and they were seeing what they were doing and trying to do things better and more creative. By the end, you would think, right, if it was just normal, it would go from 15,000 to 30,000. It went from 15,000 to 300,000. I mean, it was just exponential, the takeoff, and it was because of the free market, of capitalism, of the idea of us competing and watching and seeing and thinking, man, how can I do this better? How can I, and that's what we want. I mean, really, in an economy like ours that has freedom, those who serve the best are the ones who succeed. And that's what we want. And we need that accountability, that competition in order to give our best. And this other view just does not understand, the depravity of man. And that if we don't get anything or, by being better, then we'll just kind of sit around and, drink a soda and sit on the lazy boy. So that's not what we want in society.
So when you have this competition going on, it in a sense lifts all boats, and that's the beauty of capitalism, is that you increase prosperity because everybody's competing and trying to do better. But on socialism, this is the sad part, and that is the achievers are penalized because the companies that are successful and the people that are successful end up paying so much of their success to the government that they either lose incentive,
right,
or they've lost the ability to invest back in their company. And that's why, when we use California as an example of this socialist state, we have watched companies and millionaires and billionaires move out of that state in an unprecedented, just really wave. I mean, they're moving to Texas, for instance, because they are, from every turn, there's some kind of program that just tends to soak them to pay for it. From all the environmental regulations that have been taking place for decades to brand new things like this bullet train that they want to build. That's just a cost boondoggle. So let's look at, really, we should look at a state where it's being tried. States are supposed to be laboratories, right?
Yep.
We should be looking at California right now because that state, most people are not thriving and doing well there.
Well, let me, just before we go to the top of the hour, we now have the press release here, and it says cheerleaders win again. And it seems like, Kelly, every Friday you've got another announcement, and this is really a very significant one.
Yeah, it's. I'm going to need to come on Point of View more often because last Friday the Chaplain Squires case was a victory, which is a really important case. And then this week, a case that we've been fighting for, many years now. The Coons cheerleaders case, we have a hopefully a final victory. The state Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, refused to take the case, which means that the victory below at the Court of Appeals that said that, look, these are free speech rights of these cheerleaders, and the school can't punish or threaten them because they wanted to mention God. And so this is not just a victory for these cheerleaders. It's a victory not just for other cheerleaders. It's a victory for every student across the country, and it's a victory for every citizen because the government has no right to tell a citizen you can speak, but if you say something about God, then we're going to restrict you or punish you. That is what this win means.
We have posted it. Of course, you can go to First Liberty, but we also posted it. It's got a nice picture there, and we've got the share button. And one of the things we like to suggest, Kelly, that people do is you can click the one for Twitter or Facebook, and you can educate some other people, and then they can find the link so that they can also sign up to get your prayer list because there are all sorts of other cases you're praying about, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, people don't hear enough good news. At First Liberty, we've now, for 17 years in a row, we've won over 90% of our cases every year. And people only hear the bad news. And I think it's good for people to hear the good news because I think it encourages other people. If they go, you know what, if these 14 and 15-year-old girls can stand up, then I think I can stand up for my faith. And I think it emboldens people and encourages them that we live in a country where there's freedom, and we need to make sure and continue to protect that freedom for our kids and our grandkids.
Well, again, we have that link on the website. And Penna Dexter, we've been following this one for years. We were in two other studios when we first talked about this. So this has been a long-term one, hasn't it?
Yeah, I hope that they don't go ahead and appeal to the Supreme Court, but that might be kind of fun to watch, too, if they did.
If nothing else, those people that are writing your newsletters, your appeal letters and everything must be frustrated because just about the time they talk about something, you win another case. But that's what you want to have happen, right?
That's exactly right.
Well, let's take a break. And Kelly Shackelford was one of those individuals with the president on Monday, and we've had some people ask about that, so we'll talk about that and much more right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Final hour today. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you have not been with us until now, let me just mention last hour we did spend some time talking about one of the articles we posted, the other House race, which is just a reminder of the fact that not only as you are thinking about who you're going to vote for in your Senate race or congressional races, pay attention to the state legislature, because they're the ones that are going to be drawing some of these congressional districts, and so that is an issue. Of course, the Wall Street Journal this week talked about North Carolina's gerrymandering coup, and in just a minute we're going to get into this whole issue of affirmative action, so that's one. We've also posted some very good articles on household income jumping, which you would not know if you watched the mainstream press, but we've covered it today, and this from Investors Daily, and then also one about blue-collar workers feeling much better about their career and life and those kinds of things. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, and we have posted his piece from IPI.org on Democrats becoming democratic socialists. Going to get to a couple of the other articles, one on the Mueller investigation, affirmative action, and, of course, since Kelly Shackelford was with the president on Monday, we've had some conversation this week of was it appropriate for evangelicals to meet with the president, and so we'll talk about that. And if you were just with us in the last few moments, we've posted one more article. And there are a lot of articles up there today, as you probably figured out by now, which is the press release talking about the cheerleaders win again in First Liberty. And so you probably heard it here first. And as you find some of these articles, we've put a share button there so you can put them on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed. And that's a way we can just maximize some of the things we talk about, Penna, every single day here on Point of View.
It's a great tool, I think, to back up what we do on the program. And, that cheerleader press release would be a good one to do because you've got a very nice picture with it.
And
Absolutely.
I might also mention Penna's commentary, Launchpad, so we'll get to that a little bit later as well. One that we've just only mentioned in passing, and I thought would be good to come back to, it's called Irony Alert, and it comes from our friends at Red State, how blatant racial discrimination just might end affirmative action. And Kelly, this one got your attention. It certainly got my attention, which is why I posted it. Individual Michael Wang, you may not be familiar with him, but he actually sang at Barack Obama's inauguration. But here's an individual. As you can tell, he's Asian American. Second in his high school class of 1,000 students, got a perfect ACT score. Sang, of course, at Barack Obama's inauguration. Third place in the National Piano Contest. Was recognized as one of the top mathematics students in the country. So, of course, every Ivy League school would want to get him. Wrong. 6 out of the 7 Ivy League schools rejected him. When he began to find that there were all sorts of other fellow Asian American students with the same stories, this is why the article says how blatant racial discrimination might just end affirmative action.
Yeah, this is racial discrimination. This is, schools trying to say, well, we want a certain number of this race or this race or this race, and the result is they discriminate against people in other races. They're disfavoring certain. I mean, the idea that a guy who's number 2 in his class, perfect ACT score, number 3 in the national piano competition, I mean, one of the top students in the country on mathematics can't get in to all these Ivy League schools. I mean, that's just crazy. And again, reverse discrimination just creates more discrimination. It puts people in classes based upon their race. It obviously caused people to be disgruntled and to dislike other races because they were discriminated in their race because of this other race. it should be by the content of their character and their qualifications, and it should have nothing to do with their race. But the big news this week, of course, Kirby, was that the Justice Department weighed in, and they're actually on the side of these students. This is a lawsuit that was filed, and the Justice Department had to decide whether they were going to sort of issue a statement of interest that they might come in the case, and they did on behalf of the students, not on behalf of Harvard and these universities who were doing this, but on behalf of the students.
So there's sort of a personal rating that they're using. So they take all the sort of the hard measurements like ACT scores and, even what your extracurricular activities are. But then there was this sort of personal rating that had to do with likability and other things. That's what they're using, and they're giving a score to that, and that's what's taking some of the Asian students down below others.
One of the things that one of the reasons why they do this is they argue that African Americans, Hispanics, and so forth have suffered from racial policies that we've had in the country that have suppressed their ability to be able to come up, and so therefore they're trying to address that. That's what the affirmative action was. So I understand that part, but Asians have been discriminated against severely.
They were put in internment camps
in this country. So
some of them are vote people, or kids of vote people. Yeah.
If you were saying we're not going to do this with Caucasians or white, okay, I disagree with it, but I understand a little more. Asians have been the product of discriminatory policies in the country. So why you would overlook an Asian with these high standards is a mystery to me.
Yeah, this is wrong. I think most Americans know this is wrong. This is why the Supreme Court justices matter. This is an issue that's going to make it to the Supreme Court. And I think this is going to change. I think this sort of current approach that you are allowed as a college to use race sort of a little bit is not going to, I think that's going to disappear in the future because I think people know it's wrong.
That's one of the questions that I wanted to put on the table because the commentary that I have coming out on Wednesday is based on George Will. And George Will reminded us that Sandra Day O'Connor said, affirmative action is something we still need to keep in place for another 25 years. And so he was suggesting one of the questions the senators would ask of Brett Kavanaugh is, so do we have to wait till almost 2025 before we can actually get rid of affirmative action?
Maybe the 25 years is almost up now.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Yes.
That's just an arbitrary kind of statement.
But it illustrates how a Supreme Court justice actually argued in a actual case, right?
It does. Yeah. It's the problem. We've had some judges and justices that think they're politicians. They literally look at how things are going in the country and use that in their decision. It should be just kind of basic. What does the law say? What's the original meaning of the text? That's what if there's something wrong with the law, it's not their job to fix it. It's the job of the people to fix it. It's the job of the legislators to fix it. So that's the way it's supposed to work versus having all the power in 5 people's hands and people who are making their decision, behind closed doors and in secret. That's not the way it was supposed to be.
What about the question about these are private universities, these Ivy League schools. Why can't they have the composition that they want?
Because you've got federal laws that say that don't allow discrimination in education. Again, people could say, well, we shouldn't pass those federal laws, but we have those federal laws for both education. We have it in the workplace. If you're a big enough company, if you're, 16 or more employees, then you can't discriminate on the basis of race or sex or religion and things like that. And they do the same thing at universities. And so that's why they have to follow that. We've decided as a country we don't want that type of discrimination in education or in the workplace.
Well, when we come back, we'll take a couple of phone calls, and then we want to get into a couple of other issues, and that's just one more article we've posted on the website. Might even be a question asked of Brett Kavanaugh next week. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's take some calls, and then we'll get into a couple other issues right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Does the 14th Amendment automatically grant citizenship to anyone born in this country? That is the current policy of this government, but a number of constitutional scholars disagree. I've written about this in the past and want to focus on it again, but I've also noticed that a number of conservative lawyers who have been on my radio program accept the government's policy. So if you think the policy should be changed, I would recommend you start by convincing fellow conservatives and constitutionalists. Michael Anton is a lecturer at Hillsdale College, and he writes in the Washington Post that citizenship should not be a birthright. He says, quote, "The notion that simply being born within the geographical limits of the United States automatically confers U.S. citizenship is an absurdity, historically, constitutionally, philosophically, and practically." The purpose of the 14th Amendment was to resolve the question of citizenship of freed slaves. Essentially, it was needed to overturn the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision. Second, the amendment specifies two criteria for American citizenship: birth or naturalization, and being subject to U.S. jurisdiction. It is that second point that has been used to justify birthright citizenship. Government officials argued that subject to the jurisdiction simply means they're subject to American law. Therefore, you can argue that a tourist is subject to the laws of America while in this country, but that appears to be a misreading of the amendment. Michael Anton says that the problem can be fixed if Congress would clarify legislatively that children of non-citizens are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and thus not citizens under the 14th Amendment. Although that may be true, he needs to start by convincing his fellow conservatives that such a change needs to be made. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews. Let's go to Roy in North Carolina. Roy, thank you for joining us today. What's your point of view?
Point of view, I did have two things, but the first one was the primary was affirmative action.
Sure.
And then I was trying to get through as far as for the Democratic Party there. But the affirmative action, I think myself, basically, I think when it, I don't know the year and exactly when it came into, I apologize for that, into existence or its adoption, but I think it was basically about one of the things that was clear cut that a particular race was being discriminated against, and it was clear. And I think that's why they haven't broadened or stepped up to the plate for the Asian and whomever is being discriminated against. Because I understand what you all were saying about that young man, that he was a top-notch student, and he mastered the ACT test, but yet 6 out of 7 major Ivy League colleges or universities wouldn't admit him. Only 1 out of that 7. But I think the affirmative action was, is and was a good thing because let's face it, we know that we are saved and that the law itself, as far as God is the supreme law, but the law of this land here, there wouldn't be laws if it wasn't a necessity for them. And let's face it, man has to be forced to do the right thing, and it makes no difference what their nationalities are. And I think it was one of those things too. Even though they knew it was wrong to discriminate against anyone, I think that race thing has been thrown around too much. I know, I'm an African American, and I know that that's discrimination is going on against every race that's in the United States. And that's just my feeling on it.
Okay, well, I appreciate you sharing that. And again, just some perspectives on affirmative action. Again, even if it was necessary in the past, when does this end? And that's a question that even people were suggesting we might ask Brett Kavanaugh next week.
Yeah, I didn't understand at the beginning. I think Roy said maybe that he thought the Democratic Party started on that. Was that what he was saying on the race? It's actually, it's somewhat the opposite. The racism that was going on was actually at the time going on by the Democratic Party. The Republican Party was started in part to deal with that issue, and all the first black congressmen, et cetera, were all Republicans because they were against slavery. That's one of the reasons it started. Obviously now people feel ways about whatever parties, but I just want to make sure we get back to the beginning and how they were started. But I think that a lot of times with affirmative action, it's a matter of what you mean.
Right.
Like I think
define that term.
Yeah, many people are. Yeah. I think almost everybody would be in favor of affirmative action. In other words, if there are certain races, which there are, who have been disadvantaged in the past and treated badly and discriminated against, then to provide opportunities to make sure you're looking for to get a good diversity is a fine thing to do. What you don't want to do is then not only go to the effort to look for people who might be able to apply, but then to begin discriminating against people once they apply because of their race. Now you're doing what you said was bad. If it was bad against, for instance, African Americans to discriminate against them, isn't it bad to discriminate against Asians when they're applying? I mean, it's bad. We shouldn't do it. And so I think affirmative action, reaching out, providing opportunities, looking for, golly, we don't have enough, African Americans in this college. Let's go to where they are and let's tell them about our school and let's find the students that can make it in here. And we would love to have more diversity. I think that's fine. It's the other when you begin actually using quotas and race as a decision maker between one and another person. That's bad.
One of the problems that, of course, occurred from this was how affirmative action was implemented. So you can agree with the sort of the sentiment there. We've got some people who've been discriminated against. How do you try to address that? But then the courts started enforcing busing. Remember the busing issues of the 70s and 80s? Kids having to go to the bus stops very early, being bused in far distance. I mean, for in some cases, I think over an hour to different districts so that they would end up trying to. So you had the courts trying to force these things happening, disrupting families and neighborhoods and other things. And it got a very bad, it was the government trying to impose this in ways that really made people more antagonistic to the idea than rather trying to promote some kind of conciliation that we were trying to do.
And I think it is one thing for the government to use its sort of bully pulpit to advance ideas, but it quickly became quotas in workplaces and other things, and these were not. This is not what it needs to be, especially in education. So that's why we've had these sometimes unclear rulings about affirmative action in the education in educational institutions. But I mean, what we really want is a colorblind society. If we can do it, if we're at a point where it's going to be somewhat fair. And maybe we're getting close to that point now, and hopefully we are.
Except it continues on in the government's efforts. So under the Obama administration, they wanted to look at whether or not there is discrimination in providing loans to people. But they don't ask on the loan application what race you are. So they would look at zip codes and last names
to try to discern,
and then try to discern whether or not somebody had been discriminated against in some way, and then sort of make policy decisions based upon that. It just got bizarre as they increasingly tried to find out whether or not they could sort of assume that some discrimination was going on out there, even though there was no discrimination necessarily going on. They couldn't point to any discrimination. There was an assumption going on.
Yeah. Well, again, we wanted to put that one on the table, but again, let me mention a few other things on the website. And one of those, which again, I encourage you to do, as we just already talked about the Coons cheerleaders, and we've put that press release. But there's something else. There is a 6-minute message by Kelly Shackelford at the American Legion. And then you were going to actually provide a gold-plated .22 caliber repeating rifle. Wouldn't I like to get one of those? Engraved with the images of bald eagle, the Statue of Liberty, the Liberty Bell, and talk about what was taking place there.
Well, the every year at the American Legion National Convention, and the American Legion is such a wonderful organization of our veterans and people. They're just such honorable people, and this is a large number of folks that come to this convention every year. The president usually speaks every year at it, or the vice president. But we have the honor of representing the American Legion in a lot of cases. All the attacks on veterans memorials, we represent the American Legion. When the Pledge of Allegiance or the national motto is attacked, we represent them in those as well.
You won every one of those cases.
We have. And so we talked to them years ago about, we would love to come to the convention every year and give an award named after their top lawyer, their adjutant general, who has been wonderful with us through the years, Philip B. Onderdonk. We said we'd like to name the award after him and give this every year to the person who's done the most for religious freedom. And so they said we would love that. And we reached out to, we thought, what would be a really cool award? How about a Henry Repeating Arms .22 caliber, Golden Boy rifle, the rifle that won the West? So we called Henry, and the guy who's the head of Henry, Anthony Imperato, was so excited about the idea that he said, I'm donating this every year from Henry. So every year we get this. And it's got this gold-plated stuff that talks about the award on the side. It is the coolest thing you have ever seen. And we give it every year, and it's the greatest award ever. Well, this year we gave it to I, as I said in my remarks, it really wasn't even close this year who had done the most to advance religious freedom. Part is because of the position he had, but he did it, and that's Donald J. Trump. The executive order within months of him coming into office on religious freedom, the Attorney General guidelines he asked for that are throughout the federal government and all the departments and the military, the Religious Liberty Task Force that's now been created with the DOJ, within the DOJ that's never been in existence, the 100 lawsuits that were going on against Little Sisters of the Poor and all that were stopped, Gorsuch. I mean, we just go on and on and on. And so we said it would be right that this year the award winner was President Trump. And our problem was, I said, I don't know how I'm going to get this rifle to the White House. And it turned out Mike Pence was there, and he took it on the airplane. So it's on the way to the White House. So it was pretty cool.
We'll come back and talk about some other very important issues right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. It is Weekend Edition, getting ready for your Labor Day weekend. Just before we do so, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews, and Kelly Shackelford. This week, I've had a few people calling and commenting about the fact that there were a number of evangelicals that were invited to the White House, had dinner with the president, heard the president speak, and you were there. And so after hearing everybody else talking about what was said or what wasn't said, why it was done, I thought it'd be good just to have you, since you were sitting in that room, to tell us what actually did take place.
Well, I saw some of that, not a lot of it, but I saw a little of it and thought it's just so bizarre that, it would be that anybody would criticize the fact that, Franklin Graham and Dr. Dobson and all these people went to have dinner at the White House with Melania and the president and Ivanka and Jared and Mike Pence and Karen and Pence. And I wonder, these people who complain, would they really, if they got invited to have dinner at the White House, would they really refuse to show up? Really? And just the whole rationale for not showing up and why you shouldn't show up is just bizarre to me on so many levels. Number one, it's like, well, you're not showing up because what? Number one, we respect the presidency, the White House, the ability to be in the White House. It's all that. I think most people would go, well, that's an honor. You go and to be able to see. But it's like, what's the problem? It's like, well, if you go, you're endorsing all parts of everybody's lives. Since when? Since when you do that? So Jesus was endorsing the sinners and the tax collectors when he went and had dinner with them. It's just bizarre. There's nothing. It's the Trump derangement syndrome, that people just lose their mind, when they get around Trump and any situation around Trump. Now, I'll tell you this, what I saw happen that night, I guess I didn't think about beforehand what would happen. What it would be like. I just knew, God, this is pretty neat, having dinner in the White House. These are some of the most wonderful people, a lot of the leading pastors and others, a number of which I know, and are just neat people. Franklin Graham, great example, right? But there's a number of those pastors, Robert Jeffries. You can go on and on and on. Guess what happened in that room? People saw that the president gave a speech. The president gave a pretty small speech. The night was not spent with the president's giving a speech. The night was spent as just kind of extemporaneously, one by one, people went up to the microphone, and they basically, my best summary is, they loved on the president and his family, and they prayed for him. I can't think of anything more scriptural than what somebody should do with the president than to, love the president and to pray for him. That's exactly what we're called to do. That's what we were called to do under Barack Obama. That's what you're called to do under President Trump. And I think, I don't know, I can't see into their hearts, but I think it had to have an impact on not just the president, but Melania, Ivanka, Jared, because whatever your political affiliation is, that they're being beaten to a pulp every day. For all kinds of things that aren't true and other things. And you know how hard that would be, not just on you, like as the president, but on your family. And for somebody to come along and to genuinely, love you and pray for you is exactly what the Christian faith is all about. And that's what I saw. I had no expectations, so I wasn't thinking that was going to happen. But when it happened, it made me feel really good about, this is what Christianity is all about. And that's what they did. And I thought that was, a good thing. And so I just don't know how people could criticize that, but people can criticize anything these days.
Yeah. I think that it was the Christian thing to do in a sense, because I often pray for the president, because I think, wow, 5 minutes doesn't go by before there's another sling or arrow against them. And so, to be them, you really do have to sort of gather your strength around you and depend on the Lord. And so to have that encouragement from people that, your decisions affect, I think probably was encouraging. And I think it's appropriate. It's very appropriate because when we try to encourage somebody, we don't look back in their past and say, well, you did this and this 15 years ago. So, and you're the president, and we're not going to stand with you or encourage you because you did that. That is not even they say that, well, you need to demand that our president have character. Well, sorry.
Okay, I demand you have character.
What kind of character? What do you mean? What's your definition of that then? So anyway, I was pleased to hear it, and I'm so glad you were there to be able to describe that atmosphere to us, because I don't think we wouldn't have known.
Let me take a phone call, and then Ken, since Kelly's here, he can speak to some of the questions that maybe some of you have had. We'll go to Scott in Georgia. Scott, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for taking my call. I wanted to call when Nick was on, but I didn't get a chance to. All of this reminds me of the story in Habakkuk. We got Habakkuk complaining that Judah is an evil nation, and God responds and says, hey, I'm going to send a more evil nation to judge Israel. And Habakkuk doesn't like that answer either, and God basically gives him the smackdown like he did with Job and others. But the point is that over history, Old Testament, New Testament, and even beyond, God has used both righteous and evil leaders to both judge and restore the nation of Israel. And President Trump is by no means a righteous person, but none of us are, but by the grace of God. And God can use whoever he wants in leadership to restore or judge this nation as he sees fit.
Amen. He does it, and he usually doesn't use who we expect or what we expect, and it's usually not in the way we expect it. And that's certainly the case with this president. I mean, I don't think any of us would have guessed this or expected this.
Or as Scott was trying to say, sometimes God hits a straight lick with a crooked stick.
That's it.
Kelly, you said something that I said the other day, and that is, let's just recognize what it must be like as an incredible assault on this president. I am old. I am the oldest one around the table, although I got a birthday girl here. I'm going to give a birthday card in just a minute. But still, I'm the oldest one around the table. And I can remember the kind of slings and arrows that Richard Nixon received. And I can remember some of the criticism of Bill Clinton. But I don't think, and I think this is fair to say, no president has undergone what Donald Trump has undergone. And as you point out, it isn't just he can take it because he's tough-minded, and I'm not so sure that it's always real easy for him to take it. But then just the incredible comments about his children and his family and his wife and all of the rest. If there's ever a reason to pray for the president, this man has put, whether you like him or not, has been put through more than anything I've seen in recent memory, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's take Jared and Ivanka. Ivanka converted to Judaism before she could marry Jared, so they're obviously not Christian. They're Jewish in their faith. I can't think of a better witness of the people in that room to them who are not Christian than what those Christians did.
Yeah,
and so it's really sad for me to see some Christians on the outside who don't know the hearts of those people, who don't know what happened in the room, who weren't there, to like throw rocks. It's like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you think the best? I mean, this is I think the greatest problem we have right now in our country, period, is nobody will think the best of anybody else. Everybody wants to think the worst. Everybody wants to throw rocks at somebody else. You know what? I mean, we all deserve to have rocks thrown at us. So we ought to hold back, and we ought to show grace, and we ought to say, you know what? So-and-so's got problems, but I got problems too. That doesn't mean we don't speak the truth. I think one of the speeches that was said there is they looked at the president and said, we're not saying you're perfect, as you well know.
That's pastoral.
Yeah, they said, but we're all sinners, and we all need help. And we're going to say what's right and what's wrong, but we're still going to love people. And I think that's what they did. And again, we're all called to pray for our president. That's very clear in Scripture. our leaders, and even if you don't like the leader, and I think that was kind of used to be kind of an American tradition too. Is even if we didn't vote for the president, even if we didn't like the choice, we still wanted them to succeed because they're our president, and we wanted this country to succeed. And I feel like there's so many people that would love to see this president not succeed, even if it meant bad things for our country. And I just think it's all backwards. And we just need that grace and that thinking the best about each other because there's a lot of potential for good in everybody because we're made in the image of God.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back. And if you have a comment or a question, you feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll wind it down right after these important messages.
Healthy retirement planning is about more than just saving and investing well. It also involves seeing that your children acquire some skills in handling money. It's important to define and communicate boundaries regarding how much you'll help them, so they don't become a financial drain on your nest egg. Some parents are reluctant to think about letting go, writes Sue Schellenbarger, author of the Wall Street Journal's Work and Family feature. In a column titled, Your Children Need a Launch Plan, Ms. Schellenbarger encourages parents to begin early to coach their kids in budgeting and saving. She also warns parents not to allow their emotions to overrule fiscal common sense. Several financial advisors she interviewed for her column told her this can be challenging. Matthew Papazian, founding partner of Cardin Capital Partners in Denver, says, parents like to be proud of the lifestyle they provide their kids. But he's seen retirement plans derailed by parents who help their kids with things like home purchases they couldn't otherwise afford. He guides his clients in formulating launch plans for their offspring, and when necessary, he'll provide some of the coaching himself. According to a recent study from Pew Research, in 2016, 1/3 of young adults ages 25 to 29 were living in multi-generational households, typically with parents. Sometimes these young adults genuinely need the help, and family togetherness can be great. But parents should ask themselves, are they using financial strings to control their adult children? Are they sending the message that they don't think their kids can make it? Another financial planner, Deborah Meyer of St. Charles, Missouri, advises parents to begin early with their children to instill the mindset that you can do it. If you're able to provide well for them, still, let them work for some things. Teaching kids financial discipline will set them on a healthy path, and it's a good way to preserve your own portfolio. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews, and we'll head out to California this time. Mike, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hey, how you doing today?
I am good.
Just traveling through, heard your broadcast as I was coming across on I-10. And I do agree that, we need to really respect each and every president that we have, and we need to pray for them because they obviously have quite a difficult job. The disturbing thing to me is that, between this administration and the last administration, when Barack Obama was elected initially, the very night he was inaugurated, we had 14 congressmen, senators, and congressmen go in, met at a restaurant the very night he was inaugurated, and they pledged to do everything they could possibly do to make him a one-term president. And I just felt that was a terrible way to approach the beginning of a presidency, whether you agree with Barack Obama or not.
Sure. And the other one that I would add to that is, when you had Donald Trump elected, then you had all sorts of members of Congress that didn't come to the inauguration. And it seems to me that somewhere along the lane we need some civility, don't you think?
Absolutely. And that's the key. Like I said, you don't have to agree with either one of them. In fact, when George Bush was in office, there was a number of things I didn't agree with him, but I was all 100% behind him in order to succeed. We're Americans, and we have to work together. What I see going on, it's just so divisive and so difficult. I don't see how we're going to come together when we have 40% support the president. Who knows how many they're in decided, and then another group that just hate him. And it's like we have to try to be able to break through these barriers. And really
one of the things I have in one of my commentaries just came out recently is, Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand, which, of course, quoting from Jesus. Mike, I want to just keep moving because we got a lot of people that as soon as we mentioned this started calling in. So let me stay in California for just a minute. KYCC. Anthony, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I was just listening today, and I was really happy that today, because yesterday they were trying to pick out a lot of negativity about the president, and I just don't think that's positive. And as Christians, we should be light to the world and salt to the earth, and we should look at things in a positive light. So I don't know who that was that you had on today, but he said he went to the evangelical meeting at the
Kelly
White House,
Shackelford with First Liberty. Yes, and
he was spot on. He was a breath of fresh air. And I got to tell you, I love President Trump. I love everything he's doing. I mean, he's getting really unfair publicity, and that's because the fraudstream media has completely been politicized. And I don't agree with every single thing he says or tweets or does, and he's done his things in the past. But, we should try to be more positive about what he's doing and try to help him. I mean, support him instead of attacking him. I've never seen a president get attacked like this, and I'm 51 years old. I've never seen a president with so much animosity.
I've never seen it.
Him.
And I'm older than you are, so I can say that I go even further back, and I just never seen anything like it before. And I grew up with a father that ran for the California Assembly, and I remember some really heated debates that my father got into, and some of those but I just never have seen anything like this. And Kelly, if nothing else, Anthony just thinks you're doing a really good job.
Well, good. No, that's very kind. Look, it was an honor to be invited to be a part of that. I mean, essentially what he did. This just says something. The president held essentially what would be like a state dinner, like for another country.
That's right.
Yeah, but he did it for the leaders of evangelical leaders. That was his way to say. And that's never been done. That was a really neat gesture on his part to say, I want to invite the evangelicals. And I think he was doing it probably for his own purposes, right? But I think what I loved about it is, and again, I don't know why I didn't think that this would happen. I should have known. But what happens when you bring in a bunch of evangelical leaders and a bunch of pastors and people with big hearts is they're going to love and pray for that guy. And so he, his daughter, his wife, they all got prayed for. And again, I just think that's exactly what Christians should be doing.
Yeah. You know what? I think the media, they look at these evangelical leaders and they in a bad light. Certainly some of them have done bad things, but for the most part, they're pastors, as Kelly said, or they're people that want to spread the gospel and the kingdom of God. And so it's not like these are people that their whole motivation is power. But the media portrays it that way, I think. They think, you're getting in good with the president because you want to be close to power. They want, from most of the ones I know, and I know many of them, they want the country to thrive and do well. And they know that Christian principles will cause that to happen. They want God to be worshipped in the country, and yet they don't want to force it on the country. So they're there because they see the leader of the country, and they They want to encourage him in the Lord.
In my opinion, if that group that was there did not exist, the embassy would not be in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that the reason that occurred is because of the people in those rooms and the president's relationship with those people. So, I mean,
what about the religious liberty executive order and the task force?
All of
and all
that.
those?
I mean, I think all those things are. But what's funny is the president might be doing politics. I don't know. But what's coming back at him is a bunch of preachers that are loving, as they would anybody. They're loving and praying for him and his family. And I was proud to watch that. I really was proud to be in the room to see that. And I think it reminds all of us what the Scripture says to all of us. We're called to pray for our leaders. And have we really been doing that? We need to be doing that, especially right now. I think there's a lot of movement, a lot of things going on in the country. I think we need prayer more than ever right now for our country.
Let's take one more phone call. We don't have a lot of time in Michigan. Bob, thank you for joining us today.
You're quite welcome.
What would you like to add real quickly? We're kind of tight on time. I guess he was going to say that he believes that God put Trump in office. So I guess I've lost his connection. But if nothing else, just again, a reminder of the need for us to pray for our president. And so, Kelly, I'm glad you were there. And if people want to know a little bit more about First Liberty, and we have some press releases, we have your speech. If they'd like to watch that, it's all available at our website, or they go to First Liberty, too.
Yeah, just go to, spell it out, firstliberty.org, or go to pointofview.net. And again, if unless something changes, sometimes things change, but I'm scheduled to be on Shannon Bream tonight on Fox News Channel to talk about the next Supreme Court justice hearings, which start this next week with Brett Kavanaugh.
Yes. And I might just mention that we have a link to the Institute for Policy Innovation, IPI.org. We've posted just one very good article by Dr. Merrill Matthews, but you have some on everything from climate change to energy and big coal and all sorts of other things. So
taxes,
it's all available.
internet, communication policy, technology policy, a whole range of things.
So again, I would encourage you to go to IPI.org. I've signed up for your newsletter, so I get all the material anyway. And Penna Dexter, we do have your commentary. We never got around to that, but I want to say happy birthday, because it's your birthday tomorrow, and it's just great to have you here. And if nothing else, we want to encourage people as much as they possibly can to enjoy this Labor Day weekend, and then we'll have a tape on Monday, and then on Tuesday we'll be back into it. And Kelly, you just mentioned again, I guess the confirmation hearings begin on Wednesday for Brett Kavanaugh, right?
Well, actually, they sort of begin on Tuesday,
but the real questions.
Yeah, the questions start coming, and basically it's going to start at 9:30 in the morning and go to like 9 at night. So, I mean, it's going to be a full, both Wednesday and Thursday. He's going to become under a lot of questioning. So pray for that as well for the country.
I would certainly encourage you to pray for that because, again, the first Monday in October is when the Supreme Court once again reconvenes. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Have a great Labor Day weekend. See you back here next week.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.